In November 1996, the quiet city of Amarillo, Texas, became the backdrop for one of the most shocking and brutal murders the state had ever seen. Brittany Marlowe Holberg, a 23-year-old woman battling addiction and a life of trauma, crossed paths with 80-year-old A.B. Towery, a retired man living alone in his modest apartment. What started as a visit to a familiar place spiraled into a night of unimaginable violence, a night that would end with Towery beaten, stabbed more than 50 times, and left with the base of a broken lamp shoved down his throat. The crime scene stunned even veteran detectives, sparking outrage and fear across the community. To prosecutors, it was clear Holberg murdered Towery in cold blood for drug money. But to Holberg, it was a desperate act of self-defense during a violent struggle, a story she has never wavered from. Within months, Holberg was tried, convicted of capital murder, and sentenced to death. She would spend the next 27 years on Texas death row, her case marked by controversy, allegations of prosecutorial misconduct, and a paid informant whose hidden ties would later turn the entire case upside down. But perhaps the most haunting part of this story is what came after. Years of isolation, a grueling fight for justice, and, when her execution date loomed, a quiet readiness to face death that few could understand. To uncover how a troubled young woman found herself condemned, how a vulnerable man met such a violent end, and how a single legal revelation changed everything after nearly 3 decades, we have to go back to the beginning. But first, hit subscribe and tap the notification bell, because this is a case that doesn't just question justice. It forces us to confront the flaws in a system where life and death hang in the balance. Background and the victim. A.B. Towery was an 80-year-old lifelong resident of Amarillo, Texas, a man who had lived a quiet, almost unremarkable life in a small apartment complex just off the main street. Neighbors described him as polite, friendly in passing, and someone who largely kept to himself. But behind the closed doors of his modest home, his life would intersect with that of a troubled young woman, setting the stage for one of the most horrific crimes the community had ever seen. According to police reports and witness testimonies, Towery was allegedly a longtime client of Brittany Holberg, a relationship that blurred the lines between companionship and survival in the world of street-level sex work. What investigators found on that November night in 1996 shocked even the most seasoned detectives. Towery's lifeless body, beaten and bloody, lying on his living room floor. He had been stabbed more than 50 times, his apartment in disarray, and in a scene almost too gruesome to describe, the base of a broken lamp had been forced down his throat. These brutal details, documented in official police files and widely reported by outlets like People and Medium, would frame the narrative of a crime so violent that many believe there could be no explanation other than cold-blooded murder. But to truly understand this case, you have to look beyond the crime scene and into the life of the woman at the center of it all, Brittany Marlowe Holberg. Born on January 1st, 1973, right here in Amarillo, Brittany's early years were marked not by safety and love, but by unimaginable pain. According to public records and interviews chronicled in sources like Wikipedia and the Texas Tribune, she endured repeated sexual abuse during her childhood, the kind of trauma that scars deeply and shapes the path of a young life. By her late teens, Brittany had turned to drugs, first experimenting, then spiraling into full-blown addiction. Crack cocaine quickly became her escape, her coping mechanism, and her downfall. With her addiction consuming her, she turned to sex work to survive, often trading her body for cash or drugs in a city that offered her few lifelines and even fewer second chances. By the time she was 23, Brittany was trapped in a cycle of abuse, addiction, and desperation, a cycle that, on a November night in 1996, collided with A.B. Towery in the most violent way imaginable, leaving one man dead and a young woman on a path that would lead her straight to Texas death row. The crime unfolds. On the night of November 13, 1996, after what police later described as a minor traffic incident, a 23-year-old Brittany Holberg found herself adrift, desperate, and seeking refuge. She ended up at the apartment of someone she knew, 80-year-old A.B. Towery, a man she had crossed paths with before. What happened next would spark two very different narratives. In her own account, detailed in interviews and filings documented in Wikipedia and the Texas Tribune, Brittany claimed that what began as a tense exchange turned violent when Towery allegedly attacked her, striking her with a frying pan and yanking her hair during a heated confrontation. What followed, she maintained, was an act of survival, a desperate struggle that escalated until she fought back, defending herself against a man nearly 4 times her age. But investigators who processed the crime scene painted a far darker picture. The sheer brutality of the attack, dozens of stab wounds, blunt force trauma, and a broken lamp base shoved down Towery's throat, spoke not a moment of panic, they argued, but of uncontrolled rage. When authorities combed through the apartment, the details were chilling. Towery's wallet lay open on the floor, cash missing, his home ransacked, and items scattered as though someone had been searching for anything of value. Detectives theorized that after the violent killing, Holberg stayed long enough to collect what she could, prescription painkillers, small amounts of cash, and personal items, before fleeing into the night. Over the next several weeks, investigators pieced together her movements, tracing her path as she left Amarillo and crossed state lines, running from a crime that was quickly making headlines. The manhunt came to an end in early 1997, when police tracked her down to Memphis, Tennessee. She was arrested without incident, her capture closing the first chapter in what would become one of the most contentious and scrutinized murder cases in modern Texas history, a case that would ignite debates over addiction, self-defense, and the unforgiving machinery of capital punishment. Trial and sentence. On March 27, 1998, after a trial that lasted just over 2 weeks, the state of Texas secured its verdict. Brittany Marlowe Holberg, only 25 years old at the time, was found guilty of capital murder by an Amarillo jury. Prosecutors painted her as a ruthless killer, a woman so consumed by addiction and desperation that she slaughtered an 80-year-old man for drug money. The jury deliberated for only a short period before deciding her fate, death by lethal injection. Court records confirm that the sentencing was swift and decisive, the gavel striking down what would become one of the most controversial death sentences in the state's history. In the eyes of the state, justice had been served. For Holberg, the reality of death row had just begun. A key turning point in the trial, and what many would later call the most damning evidence, came from the mouth of a fellow inmate. Vickie Kirkpatrick, a cellmate who had shared space with Holberg during her early days in custody, told the jury that Brittany had openly confessed to killing A.B. Towery. According to Kirkpatrick, Holberg coldly admitted that she attacked the elderly man for money and drugs, even bragging that she would do it again if given the chance. Her testimony, detailed extensively by the Texas Tribune and Equal Justice Initiative, cemented the prosecution's narrative of a woman driven not by fear, but by greed and addiction, a narrative the jury clearly believed. But what the jury didn't know, and what prosecutors never disclosed, was that Vickie Kirkpatrick wasn't just another inmate. She was a paid confidential informant working with the Amarillo Police Department. According to records later uncovered by investigative journalists and confirmed by the Equal Justice Initiative and the Texas Tribune, Kirkpatrick had a long history of collaborating with law enforcement, providing information in exchange for financial compensation and reduced sentences. In a detail that would later prove pivotal, her own criminal charges were quietly dismissed the very day she took the stand against Holberg. This concealed relationship would remain buried for decades, hidden beneath layers of legal paperwork, until the courts were forced to confront it years later. Appeal attempts. From the moment she arrived on Texas death row, Brittany Holberg fought to have her case reviewed. Her attorneys argued that the prosecution had violated the Brady Rule, a constitutional requirement that mandates prosecutors disclose any evidence that could be favorable to the defense. But despite mounting concerns over hidden evidence and questions about the credibility of the state's star witness, both the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals and a federal district court rejected her claims. Each denial was a devastating blow, keeping her confined to the isolation of death row and leaving the legal system and Holberg herself blind to the truth that would only surface decades later. Although Brittany Holberg was never executed and her death sentence ultimately reversed, reports later surfaced quoting what was intended to be her final statement. Presumably those words she would have spoken if that final hour had come. According to news coverage, possibly from sources tracking her case and its emotional nuances, she was said to have prepared these words. "I want to thank y'all. I love y'all for supporting me. I want to apologize for the wrong I did to y'all. Forgive me, I'm ready." These words, tender and halting, were never actually delivered on the execution block, but they reveal a rare, deeply personal glimpse into a woman more complex than the headlines, expressing gratitude to those who stood by her, owning her mistakes, and quietly facing whatever came next. Even though these words were never spoken in the state's final moments, they offer a haunting clarity. Brittany Holberg emerges here not as a caricature of violence or a symbol of justice gone awry, but as a human being profoundly contrite, seeking forgiveness, and perhaps finally at peace, or at least resigned to whatever fate lay ahead. In that imagined moment of final reflection, we glimpse a face behind the tragedy. Someone who, after decades of struggle, pain, and controversy, allowed herself a quiet act of humanity before one final curtain. The story of Brittany Marlowe Holberg is more than just the record of a brutal crime. It is a deeply complex tapestry of trauma, violence, and a justice system that, for nearly 3 decades, carried the weight of a case riddled with questions. Behind the headlines and sensationalism was a young woman shaped by a childhood of unimaginable abuse, years of addiction, and choices that led to the violent death of an elderly man, A.B. Towery, a man whose final moments remain as haunting as they are tragic. And yet, as the years passed, cracks in the system that condemned her began to surface, revealing hidden deals, withheld evidence, and a struggle between retribution and due process. Her story forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth about how fragile fairness can be when a life hangs in the balance. Her case serves as a sobering reminder that the search for justice is rarely simple, and the human cost of errors, from investigators to juries to appeals courts, can span decades, forever altering lives and communities. Whether you view her as a victim of circumstance, a violent criminal, or a complicated mix of both, her journey underscores the importance of truth, transparency, and compassion in a system where the stakes could not be higher. If you found this documentary meaningful and you want to explore more deep, investigative stories that dissect the human side of crime and the complexities of justice, please like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to the Crime Report Network. Hit the notification bell to stay updated on future episodes as we continue to shed light on the cases that shape our collective understanding of crime, punishment, and the search for truth.